If you do not have actual consequences for checks and rolls, why are you even asking the player to make them? I don't call for as many skill checks as I used to. Now, there are times, way more than ever, where I just describe what they see. I have taken a step in a very interesting direction that I used to really stay away from, which was kind of telling players sometimes no to skill checks, making it come down to kind of one choice. Like, what is your choice? How do you want to investigate this portal? Okay, boom. Hello, friends. Welcome back to GM Philosophy. I'm the GM Philosopher. This is the channel where we empower game masters to run better games. So, there are some things I've been learning recently about choices and checks in D&D games. And recently I played, you're going to hear a lot of noise in the background. My dogs are out and hanging out. So just if you hear rattling and barking and scratching, just know that they're my dogs. But anyway, recently I played a game of Morkborg with my friends. Okay, Morkborg is like a kind of a metal core, sort of dark end of the world kind of RPG. And I'm not sure if it was actually the system of Morkborg or if it was the way the GM ran it, but I was really struck by the significance of every single check. You don't make that many checks. So when you do actually roll dice to make a check, it actually has pretty big repercussions, right? Either you see something or you don't. And that's probably important. Either you take damage or you don't, and that's definitely important because it's a super lethal game. Either you hit or you don't, which really matters because if you don't hit the first time, odds are they're going to hit you back. It's going to be bad, right? So there are many different situations where I think in D&D and in other TTRPGs, we kind of make a lot of checks that don't matter a lot. Like you might call for a perception check, and if they fail it, it's not that big a deal. Or if they make it, it's not that big a deal. But I've been rethinking the way that I put skill tests together. When I ask players to roll for things, I've been trying to raise the stakes and kind of rethink the consequences of every single roll and then making those really matter in the game. And let me give you an example. I thought to myself the other day as I was running through a game, there was a particular situation where like an enemy was kind of, squaring up with the player characters. And one of the player characters was like, I'm going to try to intimidate him. And I think, okay. Now, here was the inevitable sort of outcome of them trying to intimidate him. Because they're making this choice to assume this sort of social, position with this enemy or potential enemy, and they're going to kind of assert themselves like that, this could have a good consequence. It might intimidate the person and then they back off, giving the player character more social leverage in the situation. Or it might backfire. It might anger this NPC and cause them to be even more aggressive and maybe even lead to combat, right? Now, normally, back in the day, not too long ago, I would have just said, okay, roll an intimidation check. And I wouldn't have thought that far into it. I wouldn't have really gotten that deep into it. I would have just said, okay, roll it. Let's see what happens. If they failed it, it'd be like, no, you don't intimidate him. Or if they intimidate him, then it's like, oh, okay, he seems a little intimidated. Like, I might have really, not made the consequences be that severe. Okay. Now, I didn't always do this. Sometimes there are obviously high stakes, and there are some situations where the rolls are lower stakes. But it is also true that if you do not have actual consequences for checks and rolls, why are you even asking the player to make them? This is one question I think I've started asking myself more. And so, isn't it true that with every single roll should come either the opportunity for some kind of, at least significant success or some kind of significant failure or for something to happen, right? Sometimes I think that not placing big enough consequences for rolls really hurts the game experience because it really makes it seem like a lot of the rolls are arbitrary and it makes it feel like then, well, does my player character even matter in this situation, right? And then also, I think it takes away from, this is going to be a weird way to say this, but sometimes the fear of trying things. So player characters, they should want to try stuff, but there should be consequences for it, right? I think that this also creates bigger stakes and it makes for player characters paying maybe closer attention to actually what they try to do, because as they learn, oh, there are real consequences for the things that I do, then you're going to probably cultivate a table where choices are made with more meaning, like deeper meaning, right? In a game where, 9 out of 10 rolls that players make aren't really going to matter that much, um, you're going to cultivate specifically a game where players do not pay as much attention to the possible outcomes as rolls. By contrast, in a game where every single roll has either a negative or a positive outcome that changes the story, changes the narrative, changes the situation, you're going to have a table situation where players pay very close attention to every single check. And I kind of believe that this creates a deeper sense of immersion. Now, I'm not trying to say that every single role should be like live or die, life or death, right? Beginning and end. It shouldn't always be so bleak. But I am saying that I think in the past, I have been asking my players to make a lot of checks that there weren't going to be very like black and white kind of consequences for. And I have really made an effort to change that. So a couple steps that I've been making are: number one, I used to ask my players to roll checks and I'd see what they got. And then I would kind of figure out from the back engineering part, okay, they rolled that. What is that likely to get them? Instead, what I've been doing is before they roll, I decide on a DC and I decide what not hitting that DC will cause in terms of failure, or what hitting it will cause in terms of success. Now, sometimes, you have to do this, in situations where you might not 100% know. And I think a lot of GMs use that time between the roll and the result to kind of think up, okay, what should happen? What should happen? Because it can be tough to come up with those answers fast. So sometimes I will ask the player for the roll, and while they're making the roll, I will think about the DC in my head. Like I'll come up with it, then I'll come up with the failure and then the success. And then when they tell me what it is, I'll be getting that information and I'll be able to make that split second decision. But that gives me a couple seconds at least while they're getting their dice and rolling and adding up the numbers. That gives me a minute to think about the consequences. And I personally believe that this has led to skill checks being more like significant in my games. I really believe it has. I think it's added gravity to it. I don't know if my players have noticed this yet, but it's something I've been doing very recently, as in the last week. Now, here's another thing that I do. I don't call for as many skill checks as I used to. Now, there are times, way more than ever, where I just describe what they see. Like sometimes lately I've had players saying, can I use my Arcana to like check and see if I know about this? But if it's something they would probably know, I just say it to them and they don't even need to make a check, right? So I've also been doing this a lot more than usual. And I think the reason is because I realized I might have been wasting a lot of time on skill checks that before were kind of arbitrary, Like I think I was calling for skill checks when the truth is they were probably going to succeed anyway. And the check was really just a formality to see if they fumble or not, right? So that's one thing that I've started doing. And I think the second piece of this, like the second to-do list item for this, is not being afraid to put actual consequences at the end of skill checks. And then also not being afraid to really deploy those out. So in other words, we're talking about fewer checks. And I mean, this could be anything. I mean, we're talking about attack rolls, checks. In D&D, this is usually going to be skill checks that we're talking about here. But the truth is, I think that we could probably eliminate some of the needless checks we make. And then we could use the extra time we bought to really make the significant checks worth it. And then not be afraid to deploy good and bad consequences when they come up. In a sense, I think that I've had a tendency through this past, I would say 5-ish months of gaming to kind of run my games more on easy mode. And I didn't really want to be too hard on my players with negative things happening. I have really changed my mind about that in the last 2 weeks, partly because I keep getting players sharing feedback with me saying, I kind of wish the games were more challenging. This is legitimate feedback I get regularly. And I'm running 5 pro games right now. I mean, I'm running 6 games altogether, including my friends and family games. So, I run a lot of D&D every week, guys. Speaking of which, I do have a free Discord, the Gym Philosophy Discord. If you want to join us, link is in the description. We're almost 700 Game Masters strong. Join us and become part of the community. It'd be awesome to have you. You can hang out with me and other GMs in there. So I also have realized that I've just been, I think, too easy on like hard no's, trying too hard to kind of give my players all kinds of room to try a bunch of stuff to succeed at things. This has also led to sometimes situations just taking way too long in game, right? So cutting back on just some of this, like for maybe the very first time the other night, I actually told a player no to rolling a skill check because it wouldn't get them anything else. And I'm going to describe what I mean. There's a character who came upon a magical portal. And they were like, "Oh gosh, what is this portal?" Like they're trying to investigate it. So I said, "How do you want to investigate it?" And they said, "I'm going to cast Identify on it." Okay, cool. So they cast Identify. They identified basically what it does. It's a portal to another place. What schools of magic were involved in it? The normal stuff. And then they were like, "Does it seem like it would damage me if I walk through it?" And I said, it is unknown to you. And then they said, "Well, could I roll an Arcana check to see if I notice?" And at that point, in the past, I would have said, yeah, make that Arcana check. And I would have let them go through all the things they want to go through in order to determine this. But they had already cast Identify. The truth is the portal was going to damage them. But the Identify spell wasn't powerful enough to reveal these magical properties because it's a very powerful magical anomaly, basically. So they didn't uncover that. Arcana wasn't going to give them any more information because in my mind, Identify was already giving them more information than a simple observation would have yielded. The truth is they just didn't know. That's just the truth. It's kind of a situation where there's no way to know. And so the only other thing left was to test it. And I said that. I was like, they were like, "Can I make an Arcana check?" And I was like, "No, at this point, you have learned really everything your character would know. Like, that's it. That's the end. That's the end of the investigation. What do you want to do next?" I probably cut out 5 extra minutes of them just trying different things by just making that concrete choice. Now, in the past, I would have really frowned on that. And I would have said, I want to give every player character every chance to do everything they want with their character. But here's another thing that's true, guys. I've been really trying to hone in on letting my player characters have equal time to do things. And sometimes with that open-minded approach, I want my players to be able to do all the skill checks and check all the things and do all these things, to go down their whole checklist of things. If you let players do that a lot, you'll notice that some players do it a lot more than others, and that's going to eat up a lot of spotlight time. And spotlight time is really important, managing spotlight. So I have taken a step in a very interesting direction that I used to really stay away from, which was kind of telling players sometimes no to skill checks, making it come down to kind of one choice. Like, what is your choice? How do you want to investigate this portal? I'm going to cast Identify. Okay, boom. And then it's like, well, I want to do this. No, you've already investigated it. That was your choice, right? Now, with that being said, I can understand how there could be obvious arguments against this kind of approach, in the sense of well, doesn't that take away from immersion? You're kind of railroading at that point. There is a railroadiness to that. It's like you're kind of limiting the player characters now. No, I'm not trying to limit the player character. I'm trying to cut right to the chase instead of just spending a bunch of time to get to the chase. The truth is, no matter how good their Arcana checks would have been, no matter how good their other investigation checks would have been, if they would have climbed the tree and looked at it through a telescope, all of these outcomes would have yielded this result. They could only know so much about it. And casting Identify, I knew, got them to the peak information that they would have known the fastest possible. So why go through all the other skill checks just to not show them anything new, right? Now, if there were more things to discover, I could have called, they wanted to do an Arcana check. I could say, roll the Arcana check. And then if I was afraid of spotlight, I could say to the other characters, what are you doing while he's doing that? What are you doing while he's doing that? What are you doing while he's doing that? Right, to make sure that I spread the spotlight time around. So I'm not trying to say always limit all the checks. There are times when a lot of skill checks may make sense for a situation. But I'm also saying is pay attention to which checks may be actually useful and significant, and which ones are just arbitrary. We can just eliminate them. Also, eliminating these checks. Now, this video isn't about spotlight time, but eliminating needless checks helps to improve spotlight time. But it also helps us to improve the significance of actual checks and makes every dice roll seem more important and more significant. And I think that that is a very good and desired effect. So boom, there are my thoughts about that. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think, guys. And that's going to be it for this one. Thank you for coming back for an episode of GM Philosophy. Empowering Game Masters to run better games is the goal. Roll some D100s for me at your next game, guys. And I will see you on the next one.